Today's episode of the Menfulness podcast is sponsored by the Knights Menfulness Talk Group. Did you know we meet on the first Monday of every month at the Community Stadium, proudly hosted by the York City Knights? Now, you don't need to know anything about rugby, and there's always some of us trustees on board. It's usually hosted by Dan. We break into groups and we just share openly for a couple of hours. We share about what we've been through, what we're going through right now, about our challenges or our wins. Now, it sounds daunting, but so many blokes who have come along and stayed quiet for the first few sessions have eventually opened up and found it to be really helpful coping with life's challenges. The atmosphere is always incredible. We leave feeling lighter, having been heard and understood. So if you're looking for an outlet, then please do come and give us a try. These sessions are free and open to men over 16. For more information, check out meetup.com/menfulness or just turn up at the night shop opposite the main entrance inside the community stadium from 7 p.m. or reach out to us direct for more information. Hello and thank you for taking time out of your day to spend an hour with us. Or perhaps you didn't. Maybe you're washing up at the gym, running or driving right now, and we're an accompaniment to your busy life. And we're very happy with that. And however we find you, you're very welcome here at the Menfulness podcast. Before we get going, I am chuffed to announce that we won an award last weekend, the very first BBC Make a Difference Awards. We came away with the Community Group Award, which has totally blown us all away. The fact that we even got nominated was incredible, but to win the award has humbled us all indeed. And we're so grateful for all the support that we get in what we're trying to do. A big thank you goes to all of our volunteers for all of their hard work making everything happen, and to the members who make this thing the success that it is. And also to you for listening in and sharing our message. So while we're relishing in glory, here's some feedback from the last couple of episodes. First from Adam on episode 4 with Sinead. This was posted in the Menfulness Facebook support group. Listen to an episode of the Menfulness podcast about what to expect at the counselling sessions. For those of you wondering if it's for you, it's definitely worth a listen. I found the discussion of what to expect and how the sessions are structured really helpful. Hopefully we'll have my first session this weekend. Yes, Adam, that's great to hear that you've gained something from the podcast and that you feel able now to take that step into counselling. We wish you all the very best, mate. Keep in touch. This is from Matt on Aidan's episode 5. I've just listened to this on a train down south for work. What an insight, eye-opener and inspirational way to start the week. Over the last 6 months of coming to football, albeit infrequently, this group has helped me immensely. Only a couple of weeks ago, I had a moment at football where I stopped, looked around and realised that I had no idea what any of these guys were going through, but that on that pitch, everyone is there for the same reason. Aidan was the first person to welcome me 6 months ago, and as he said about Mike's words to him, I remember the same initial welcome. Great work to everyone involved. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. It feels very full circle to have Aidan come on here and speak about that same experience, and then to read how the football has had that same impact on you. So yeah, I appreciate you getting in touch, mate, and keep talking. Thank you. Now, in today's podcast, we're speaking to Pete Quinn. It's hard to state really just how awesome Pete is. If Sinead is the caring, guiding matriarch, then Pete is the wise, sage, oracle figure. Pete's an inclusion consultant who is out there working within the education, tech, corporate and arts sectors, helping make meaningful change and harnessing the power of diversity. He's a consultant, coach, speaker and leader. He's nudged us when we've needed to act. He's supported us with so many opportunities and funding bids, and I've lost count. He and Joe Garden from Social Vision put together our impact report, which you can find at menfulness.org, which really shows how our work is having a positive effect. He's just an all-round good egg, and we really wouldn't be the Menfulness that you see without him on board. In this conversation, we hear about Pete's journey to York from Birstall via Tanzania and Oxford to working for himself in the field of inclusion and to Menfulness, of course. Along the way, we talk travel, personal challenge and roller skating. We learn that building a successful and meaningful vocation doesn't require a traditional upbringing, and that being more inclusive tends to benefit everybody. If you want to learn more about Pete and his work, then he is active on LinkedIn, Twitter, or visit petequinnconsulting.co.uk. Trigger warnings to consider. We touch on baby loss and bereavement in this chat. We're very, very grateful for Pete to come on here and share his journey and experience with us. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Pete Quinn, thanks for coming, brother.
That's all right, Sam. Nice to be here.
Thank you, man.
In the man cave.
Yeah.
It's everything that was promised and more.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate your time. And before we get going, I think it's important to say that we're incredibly grateful for what you do for Menfulness. It cannot be overstated what you've brought, whether it's funding, guidance, time, experience, the impact report, just generally. You're the volunteer that dreams are made of, Pete. I mean,
well, that's going to be my next tattoo.
Volunteer probably doesn't do you justice, but yeah, thank you, mate. I very much appreciate you.
Well, it's a privilege. I just love what Menfulness does, so I tend to get involved in things that I love rather than things that I'm not too keen on. But when I first heard about Menfulness, I was that's the sort of thing I want to be involved with.
And when was that then? When did you first hear about it?
So I think we've all lost. The concept of time is all a bit unfamiliar to us with, global pandemics and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think it was 2017, and I went to Micklegate Social, which is a kind of bar restaurant place, top of Micklegate in York, and I'd heard that there was an organisation that was starting to form, starting to germinate, and Jack and Mike were sat at the front there with half of York City Council on the other side and lots of voluntary organisations. And I just went along. I can't remember if it was Andy Chapman, who was a great colleague and friend who was the North Yorkshire Suicide Prevention Coordinator, or whether it was Joe Gardam, who oversees Social Vision. One of the two invited me to come along. And so I just turned up and was from a perspective of what can I do, what can I get involved with. This kind of work sounds interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I was there.
Yeah. So that's part of how you roll it, is it? Just sort of turning up to these sort of events and seeing if there's something.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, in my professional business life, it's a bit more organised than that, I'd like to say. I don't loiter with intent. But when I hear about community initiatives, I do like to get involved in them. So where I come from, in Birstall in West Yorkshire, the Joe Cox Foundation was kind of born out of the tragedy there, but their message of more in common was something that I was really drawn to, and about making, we have far more in common than divides us, and kind of like communities can solve their own problems if you just give them enough resource to do so. Yeah. So that's what I was, and I like the name Menfulness. I don't know if it was like come and meet Menfulness or whether Menfulness grew out of it. I think
I've heard that meeting spoken about before, and I think Menfulness grew out of that meeting. And yeah, it's a great name. I think it's Mike's brainchild. Okay. That, but yeah, it's
copyright Mike Hewitt.
Yeah, all rights reserved. It's good though, isn't it? Because it kind of it does what it says on the tin.
Whenever I've talked about Menfulness, people don't go, wait, what? Explain what that means. They're like, oh, okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah, that's good.
And when I've worn the Menfulness merch, at sporting events and things like that, people have come up and said, absolutely love that message. The don't man up, speak up message, and they just get it straight away. It's
simple. I guess it's like that more in common. It's a simple way, and it speaks to people already get it. Yeah, that's awesome, mate. And I think I wanted to speak to you today because, like many of our other guests, I've realised that even though we spent quite a bit of time together, there's loads about your story that I don't know. Okay. Again, with the work that you do and the work that you've done for us, I thought it'd be really useful to see if we can tell your story a little bit. Okay. So to start with then, could you tell us where it all began?
So I grew up in Birstall, which is West Yorkshire. Everyone knows it now because IKEA is there and Showcase Cinemas. But I remember when all that was green fields and a pet food factory, which you can still, if the wind's blowing in the right direction, you're still very familiar with that. But I grew up there in late 80s, early 90s. It was quite an interesting time to grow up. Margaret Thatcher was still around doing what she did to industrial communities. So I grew up there. I went to school in Birstall, then in Dewsbury, which is also, kind of, it's quite nice to be able to say Birstall and people know where that is, because when I lived down south for many years, I'd say, oh yeah, I'm from Birstall, and they'd go, Borstal? As if I'd been like to an approved school when I was younger or something. I went to secondary school there, and then I went to sixth form in Huddersfield, to Huddersfield New College. So But I mean, I had a great mum, a really great role model, tried to do everything she could for us. Dad, not such a great role model, really lovely man. Went to Oxford University on on a scholarship. He was from a working class background. His dad was a baker and his mum was worked in the post office, and he ended up going to Oxford University, when that was pretty unheard of in the 60s.
Yeah.
He was the first cohort to go to St Catherine's College, which was this brutalist concrete structure in Oxford, and he did okay there, but he had a very strange upbringing, and as it turned out, he had bipolar, which was then called manic depression. So my summer holidays were very adventurous, so my dad would go high in the summer,
Right.
and so when most people's childhoods were sort of kind of normalish, the windows were thrown open, we had Meatloaf playing at full blast, or Mozart, or the Rocky Horror Picture Show was a staple of my childhood because my dad loved it, or Marianne Faithfull, and he'd do things like, I'm just going out for a game of golf, and my mum was born in St Andrews, and we used to go on holiday there, and the home of golf, and we didn't have mobile phones then, Sam. I don't know if you remember those
There
times.
was a time.
So you get the phone call from the call box and the pips, and my dad had gone to play golf in St Andrews.
Wow.
It just he hasn't come back for his tea, which wasn't that unusual. So that was quite and it was sometimes fun, but other times not.
Did you know what was going on there?
Not really. So we were, and it did have a big impact. And he also drank. He was an alcoholic. So he was, he was well known and made a hero in the village where we lived, but a tragic hero.
Yeah.
So he would sit in the village square drunk. Or he'd be at the bookies, and loads of people knew him. Everyone would be like, all right, Sean. And it was really tricky growing up there because you were trying to, kind of get on with the girls and be a cool kid. And then your dad's the village drunk. It's not that easy to kind of be cool when your dad's drunk. So that did have an impact on my childhood. But my mum gave me loads of opportunities. We were always doing stuff. I went to sixth form college in Huddersfield, which doesn't sound that glamorous, but then that took me to Tanzania in East Africa because the biology teacher there had a link with someone in Tanzania. So we got to do a trip to Tanzania. When most people were learning to drive, I was out in Tanzania. So spent my driving money on that. So I did 2 trips to Tanzania with sixth form because it took me a bit longer than usual to do my A-levels. I did not have the most idyllic childhood in terms of my behaviour and the way I was at school.
Right.
So a bit of a juvenile delinquent, I think was the term then. I smoked from a very early age. I did a little bit of drinking and messing about myself. And so, then I got to sixth form college and I got the opportunity to spend a year living in Tanzania.
You went for a year?
Yeah, I lived there for a year.
Wow.
And I'd already lived there for a few months at a time. And that was really impactful on me, and I'll bring it up because my neighbour was a wonderful man called Wilfred Camaro, and he taught me about resilience, about faith. So I went to a Catholic school, not Catholic anymore, like most people who went to Catholic school, it feels like. But he had such faith and such optimism, and so I picked up that. My son's middle name is Kimaro because I now have to take him on a bound to take him and show him where his name came from. But he had such a positive faith that things would be okay, things would work out okay. So I taught English there. I climbed active volcanoes. I went on safari. I got involved in loads of stuff as a volunteer. So I had to raise a bit of money to go out there. And that faith and optimism that he had has stuck with me for most of my life. I sort of saw that in action. And there were lots of other people who, that was a really impactful time. So I came from quite a chaotic family situation, but he was like a bit of a father figure, I realise, and sadly he died like many of my colleagues there. He had HIV and died really, the life expectancy in those countries is pretty low anyway. So I was one of the first things I started to do in terms of giving back to my community there was I started a fund when I worked in Oxford, and jumping forward, to raise money for all the kids there whose crops failed in their family or their parents died of HIV,
right,
or those kind of things. And we raised enough money so that they would get to stay in education and not lose that vital stepping stone out into life. But so I lived in a third world country before I went off to university. So that was,
And then you kept that connection with it, even once
Yeah.
you'd moved to Oxford. You were raising money. And,
I'm
and-
still in touch with some people back from Tanzania. I learned to speak Swahili. I had quite an interesting time. And in terms of the mental health picture there, I mean, I was warned off from a couple of occasions from not going to the bar and drinking with the witch doctor of the area, which wasn't like someone with, the kind of stereotypical that you see in Western films, like feathered hats and stuff. He was just a guy in a suit, but it was like, don't drink with him. But there were a number of people who had relatives who had what I recognise in my father's mental illness, something like bipolar or something like drink difficulties, and there was a name for them as kichaa, which was madmen, and there was an idea about demonic possession, and there was always an undercurrent of their beliefs of ancestors and things like that. So most people in the area I lived had a Christianity type faith, whether it was Methodism, Lutheran, or whichever missionaries had got there first, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But when someone died there was always the underlying kind of ancestral bit as well.
Right.
I was going off to university to do anthropology, which is the study of people. So it was almost like I was doing field work before the degree, almost.
Absolutely.
Although that sounds like a little bit kind of slightly colonialist and not quite right. But I learned a lot from living in a completely different community, and their attitude around mental health was very different to mine, but not that different to what we sometimes encounter in terms of stigma and
absolutely,
and being ostracized or having behavior explained because of
it might be a little more extreme, but so then you moved to Oxford, did you study?
Went to Oxford Brookes. I will admit I applied to do a degree two places. One was a place in affiliated to Durham University, so I was going to get a degree from Durham, or I was going to get a degree from Oxford Brookes, and that was my master plan. And then I was going to go and work for the United Nations and travel the world. I went to Brookes, did anthropology, had a great time, loved it there, and then I settled in Oxford and got a job with Oxford University. All around making the university a bit more accessible and inclusive to adult learners predominantly. So there was a department there specifically for part-time students. And I encountered many people who at school had been told they were thick, who were dyslexic, and who had also dropped out of school for mental health reasons. And at the time, in the sort of late-ish 90s, early noughties, there was a lot of opportunity funding and pipelines for people with historic mental health difficulties to come and study.
Right.
So I encountered a number of people who needed a bit of extra support, which was kind of my purview. And then I moved into the Central University and became the head of disability there, where I encountered huge numbers of students who were absolutely brilliant, bright, fantastic, from all sorts of backgrounds, who just happened to have bipolar disorder, or who happened to have OCD, or who happened to have autism. And so the challenge there was to persuade really bright individuals that they might need a little bit of extra help, or that we might need to do things a little bit differently for those individuals. So it's the flip side of what we usually encounter around mental health. So there was a bit of stigma, but there was also a bit of talent, and it's like, how do you support that talent? How do you support people who are...
This is where your journey for inclusion started then. So when you were leaving Tanzania and coming to Oxford, your plan was UN work.
Something like that.
And in somewhere along that, you found, actually, I
couldn't get in at Oxfam. Oxfam was going through one of their thousands of restructures, probably, and I couldn't get in there. I did a bit of volunteer in the central office in Oxford, because Oxfam comes from Oxford. That's where they were based. So that was the sort of thing I wanted to do. And so I didn't, best laid plans. I didn't really have a plan.
No.
But so my degree was really useful.
Yeah. Well, you were studying people,
rituals, the way they behave, cultures, taboo.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you were finding people. You found sort of skill in inclusivity.
Yeah, I had really good people around me, and really supportive people who were all aligned with this mission. And as you can probably imagine, if you're working in an organisation like Oxford, which has got 1,000 years of history and isn't, they don't really have to change because they're successful. So what they're successful at, they are really successful at.
Yeah.
So it was incremental, getting change made, convincing academics and other people that this was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And not from a moral perspective, but from a success and talent perspective.
Yeah.
So we got things like use of assistive technology in exams. We really interrogated dyslexia and whether it was a problem for people who were very highly intelligent. We did all sorts of things around demystifying mental health, autistic spectrum type stuff. And then, mobility, sensory impairment, all those things that you need to make little bits and pieces of changes or fundamental changes sometimes to include.
Yeah. I mean, you're still hearing a lot about that at the moment. And it seems that this was back in the noughties then.
This was in the noughties when it
the
was
start of the conversation.
It was not acceptable in the noughties either.
But it was just starting to become.
Yeah. So late 90s, there was a lot of money flying around.
Yeah.
For that. Now there's less and less money, but there's still that ambition.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was about. I think we really made a difference. The Equality Act came in 2010, and that gave quite a bit of leeway to make progress. In 2005, there was something really powerful, which was meaningfully involving the people that you are aiming to support and include.
Yeah.
So you had to go and meet with disabled people with mental health difficulties, and say, these are the barriers we think you're encountering. What can we do about them? And we did it together.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the good things about Menfulness and that resonates is when we've got an issue or a thing that we spot and highlight, we can fix it together. We say, what is it that we need to do to fix it? Who wants to have a go at it? Here's some money.
Yeah.
We'll support you. But it's not like, there's a problem there and it needs fixing, but we'll leave it to someone else to do.
Yeah.
So, and we think we know the answer, but we're not going to talk.
We're
to them
lucky in that respect that the five of us that kind of steer the ship, we don't on our own know what we're doing. Yeah. We're administrating this, and we're lucky enough to have people like you who actually do it in the real world.
Yeah, I think you do yourself a bit of a disservice.
Well,
we don't know what we're doing. You do know a bit of what you're doing. But
we've got lived experience, and we share from the same pot as everybody else. Yeah. We don't. But it is really useful having people like yourself who are actually doing it out there, making a real difference. Yeah. And so, how far do you think we've come? Since you started having these conversations and where we are now.
Menfulness. So,
well, I mean generally.
Generally, okay. So societally, I think if you think about it, we're no longer reliant on just Stephen Fry or the odd footballer talking about mental health as this kind of concept that they experience in their celebrity land.
Yeah.
We've got to the stage where people are talking honestly and openly. And I would say then we've got Tyson Fury who's not just talking about it honestly and openly, like he's literally ripping his heart open and saying, that's powerful stuff, but there's still someone else. There's still like another.
Yes.
So now we do have people who are actively saying, I've got mental health difficulties. I struggle sometimes. Sometimes I have bad days. Sometimes I have good days. What I do about it is this. Yeah. And it gives people the opportunity to do it themselves.
Yeah.
I think where we've not got to yet is making duvet days normal in the workplace.
Yeah.
Not acknowledging that some people just need a few days sometimes to kind of consolidate and come back.
Yeah.
We've not recognised that people with bipolar, schizophrenia, psychosis can actively participate in workplaces, in society, in communities. Yeah. We've not quite got there yet. I think we've made so much progress, but it is progress forwards and then back. So at the moment, government is not making the right noises around it.
No.
The man up bit is where they've got to, not the man up, speak up bit. It's like, sort yourselves out.
Yeah, and the cuts in funding don't fill you with confidence with stuff.
Cuts in underfunding. So it's World Mental Health Day today. So
it is,
happy World Mental
Health
Day, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
The thing I posted this morning was a stat from the Centre for Mental Health, which is there's a 10-year gap on average between a young person being identified as having a mental health difficulty to them getting support. Yeah. So 10 years on average.
Right.
And I just said, imagine if that was cancer. Imagine if that were diabetes. So that's not the most kind of enlightening and uplifting statistic. No. The good thing about that is that they're actually looking at it. They're doing research on it. And we know a lot of things that can impact on that. So if a young person gets an early intervention, gets an effective treatment, it reduces the impact of the mental illness. It reduces the duration of the mental illness. And it means that they've got a much better chance of kind of making it through There's a lot of socioeconomic factors and other areas as well, but at least we've got a sense of what works.
And I suppose if it is dealt with at an earlier stage, then the cost to services down the line,
Totally.
you would think it would be a false economy to keep people waiting that
So
long.
you're not crisis managing. And
Yeah.
sadly, as we've seen and encountered a bit in the Menfulness groups, there are people who are just left a long time with promise of something, and they don't get it.
Yeah.
Now, I think that what Menfulness has done as a sort of service, but I really don't want to call it that, as a group, as a community, is we've taken out some of that kind of difficulty that people experience along the way. So we give an opportunity for people to talk, we give an opportunity for people to exercise, we get an opportunity for people to engage with other people, normalise that there is mental health difficulties that people encounter, but that you don't necessarily have to go and have intensive counselling just because you're feeling low.
Yes.
If you're depressed and you have real challenges and difficulties, it really helps. That talking bit really helps. And if in doubt, get an assessment. Sinead was great on the last podcast about what that looked like and the benefits of it, and it's great to see it. But you can do stuff yourself. You can having agency and having the ability to do stuff is powerful. And I would say we've seen that in the people that have taken on some of the activities in Menfulness, who themselves have lived experience of mental health difficulty.
Yeah.
That kind of agency they get for it, that meaning and purpose that they get for it is really good stuff, and that helps them a lot, and it ripples out.
Absolutely, they're the most keen to give back to the group, which is it's amazing to see. And I think you're right. I think the community being able to talk honestly about what's going on with you is liberating, but I think there is still some of that stigma. I spoke to one guy who said, I wouldn't want to talk like this to my colleagues because I do think that it would affect my opportunities for progression at work. Like, he might have a wobble, so we don't want to risk him going off sick if we promote him, and that sort of that still exists among people.
Totally. And there was a guy who ran Lloyd's Bank for a while. I don't know if he's still there, but he wrote very openly and honestly about when he got to a crunch point and he essentially burnt out.
Yeah.
And I thought that's transformational. And there's a leader of one of the Nordic countries who's talked about that. That's fantastic. And that's where we want to be. But, I work with organisations on strategy around mental health. That's part of the work I do, based on kind of experiences that I had when I moved. I moved to York to be a director of student support at the University of York. So that was an operational and a strategic role. So we had to develop mental health strategies and ways of working and linking up with health and other services. And before I came, I read up on quite a bit of things around positive psychology, and some really interesting work that was done by an organisation called the Carnegie Trust about developing resilience. Now, resilience is a really problematic term for people of kind of typical undergraduate student age, but what that means is bouncing back from challenge with an awareness and knowledge of how the next time that challenge comes, you can bring that in. And so we tried to develop that approach at York, and I think that stood us in good stead. And there was a big piece there about meaning and purpose, and I think that is evident in Menfulness. So people have meaning and purpose by being part of Menfulness and part of its activities, which gives them that agency and gives them that sense of resilience.
Yeah.
Or whatever the better term for resilience is that we haven't quite arrived upon. And that's the bit about giving communities a little bit of money to solve their own problems.
Yeah.
And that's what I think Menfulness is a great example of.
Thank you. That's awesome. So your position in York Uni then, that was Director of Mental Health, did you say?
Director of Student Support.
Student Support.
So that included the fantastic mental health and disability teams that were there.
Yeah.
So I came from Oxford, where there was an expectation of excellence in services. That was totally the case at York when I arrived. Also financial assistance, community relations, the chaplaincy team,
everything around well-being.
Basically, it was community. Everything to do with community. So lots of links within the community as well. And that's what I came to do, really.
Yeah.
That was in 2013.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so here you remained. This is where you built your life then.
I did, yeah. So, I mean, I lived in Oxford for a number of years, and it was wonderful. It was completely ridiculous stress-wise and
The work that you did.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
because Oxford is a very dynamic environment, but whereas most university terms are 10, 12 weeks, Oxford does it in 8.
Right.
And it does it on steroids. Not literally for the benefit of the tape, but it's like we're not messing about here. So
Yeah.
in these weeks that we're open, term wise and study wise, it's relentless.
And
Expectations
stressful.
are huge.
Burnout, overwhelm.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's a weird culture in that if you produce something, all you get is critique because they expect you may have done an excellent job. But that's a given.
Yeah, perfect is the
perfect
goal.
is where you've got to get to, and then it's like, well, that's not great. This needs refining. That's got go off and do it again. Sort of, that kind of mentality, and it's almost like survival of the fittest.
Yeah,
and that is the case for academic environments, unfortunately. I had a great time there. I got promotion after promotion. I went to do some work there in the business school. I went on a course, which was transformational. It's where I brought my family up.
Yeah.
It's where I met my wife.
Oh, so you met your wife?
I met my wife.
In
Yeah,
Oxford.
she's Cornish.
Yeah.
Apart from that, she's fine. We met in Oxford. We got married there because it was equidistant from our families.
Right. Okay.
Great. Two children. Leading up to 2012. Third child on the way. All doing pretty amazing. And then, unfortunately, our third child didn't make it. So. Which is really, which was I mentioned it because it was a catalyst for moving to York. So I saw the job here, up here, and I thought, I'm going to have a go for that. And then I'll get the feedback on it.
Yeah.
And I'll see how I did. Now, this was a little bit after that time. And Oxford Uni were absolutely wonderful with me and around my bereavement. Because as a man, it's really difficult to sort of, it's a really tricky thing anyway. So when you've got a wonderful daughter, when you're doing that, everyone's always talking to you about it, and like if you're a woman, my pregnancy was 10 times worse than yours, and all that kind of stuff. And you talk about pregnancy, and you hit those milestones when you can start to talk about it and all that sort of thing. And then you've got your mat leave booked in and your paternity leave booked in, and then suddenly you're not having a baby.
Yeah.
And it was really tricky because some of my very close colleagues were also expecting.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult to go, oh, well, I'm not actually having paternity leave now. And
Pete.
So we had some time, we had some downtime.
Yeah.
And it's just really difficult because, if people ask me, how many kids you got? I say 2.
Yeah.
But I have 3, really.
Yeah.
I had 3. So Adam's my son, Lauren's my daughter, and then I had William. And I saw a post on LinkedIn, I think, over the weekend with someone just saying 17 years ago, I had William and he didn't make it. And I was like, oh, I had William too and he didn't make it. And it is really tricky because it is, mental health difficulties are a taboo. And it was pretty hard to get over. But so, York was a new beginning.
Pete, I'm so sorry you went through that, man.
Yeah. Well,
it's Baby Loss Awareness Week this week too.
Oh yeah. Maybe that's why I saw the post.
Yeah. And I've having gone through a successful pregnancy, and I've got a friend of mine. I was posting a lot of stuff about Luna, and I posted a what's the scan picture. And then I had a chat with my friend, and she said that was hugely triggering for me because actually, you don't think like that automatically. You think I want to
about it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. We should be talking about it more.
Yeah.
And I think, I guess, from a male's perspective as well, because you haven't physically experienced the pregnancy. Accessing support's probably even more stigmatized from a male's point of view in that situation.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was quite a couple of people who I worked not far removed from sort of pulled me to one side and said, that happened to us.
Yeah.
Mainly women, not men.
Yeah.
But at least then you knew you weren't the only one.
Did you get support?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were offered to go and talk about it.
Yeah.
Luckily, my wife, she works as in medic. She's a medic essentially. She's an ACP now, so she trained as a nurse and she's worked throughout as a nurse and more recently kind of in the palliative care, so hospice environment. we just kind of worked together to get through it, really.
Yeah.
It's never okay. It's
No.
never like back to as it was.
Absolutely not.
But it from it came good things. So we just went away for a bit, and had a bit of grief, and spent time with our kids, and then went back to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes it makes you choke up. Sometimes, like just now, it's fine because I've talked about it enough and talked it through. In the lead up to all of that, I'd always had something called supervision because I was working in tricky circumstances with tricky dynamics, and it was so that I would act professionally rather than taking on too much. So I was used to talking to people.
Yeah.
Me and my wife talked a lot about it, and we kind of worked through it together. And I also had done kind of coaching and other bits with people. So, and I'd accessed some bereavement counselling, not to do with the death of William, but to do with my father and my grandmother simultaneously having strokes. My grandmother was a very powerful person in my life because my dad was not particularly parental. You know, it was more interested in drinking and going to Paris and doing stuff like that. My grandmother sort of stepped in a lot alongside my mother, who also was a very powerful influence for me. But she sort of, whenever I ran out of money at uni, or whenever I was at a loose end suddenly, and I hadn't told her about it, a check would come through and it would say, "Oh, you've won the premium bonds this week, Pete," and it would be 50, 100 quid or something, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that when I lost those two individuals, kind of just through that stroke, they hadn't died yet. It really, I really got rocked, and I think that was not long after my first child. I think I experienced a bit of postnatal depression, which is not uncommon in men. You know, I was trying to work my backside off to provide for this family.
Yeah.
And I remember I went and saw this person who coincidentally was in a hospice. That was where I could go and see them 5 or 6 times. I think I did 5 or 6 sessions, worked through all that stuff. So I never went and saw anyone specifically that I recall about William's death, but I was really well supported by my workplace, by my family, by my friends.
Yeah.
And that wasn't just, "Pete, you need to talk about it. I had a group of friends that I would just hang out with, and I had a BlackBerry, and would always be on emailing with work, and I would just sit with them, have a cup of tea, and we didn't really chat, but I was just there. And they were fine with that. They weren't like, "Come on, Pete, get off your BlackBerry."
Yeah.
It was like, we're here, man, if you need us. And
That's
they left
all you
me
need
alone.
sometimes,
They
isn't
left
it?
me alone.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just I needed someone to say, "Come on, Pete, talk about this terrible thing that you've had." I also need to say that Lee Child and the Jack Reacher stories helped me a lot in there. Perfect distraction. I would just read my way out of, not in denial, but just as in a processing thing.
Focus your mind. Yeah.
So kind of in the aftermath of that, I did that course and applied for a job up here and got it, much to my sort of surprise, because I was like,
Well, it sounds like you've done pretty well for yourself at Oxford with all these promotions and what have you.
But there was this kind of, well, I'll give it a go and we'll see what happens. And I had enough confidence in that, and I was expecting, we didn't think you were quite strong enough in this area, and it was a few hundred people who applied for that job, I understand, and I went for the interview, and I some people helped me with, well, I would do this and I would do that, and don't overthink it. Talking about music, Swedish House Mafia was the soundtrack to that application, on repeat. So kind of refining, honing, got the job. So we all moved up to York. My kids moved schools, my wife moved jobs.
How long ago was this then? How old?
2013.
Right. Okay. So
we
nearly
moved
a decade ago.
Moved up here and got to work at the Uni of York, which was a bit different from Oxford.
Yeah.
In good and bad ways. And I was in familiar territory around kind of disability and mental health, but some of the wider stuff not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I understand there's quite a few trips to Hong Kong in that time as well. You've still been...
Well, I'd made a link with Hong Kong when I was in Oxford, so some Hong Kong people came to visit one of my colleagues at a different university, and she suddenly couldn't welcome and accommodate them. She said, well, can they come and see you in Oxford? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I gave them the full Harry Potter tour. We took them for fish and chips. And they were interested in what we'd done at Oxford around dyslexia in particular, because we had a large number of dyslexic students, which they just couldn't fathom.
Yeah.
How can you do an Oxford degree and be dyslexic? So we told them how, and they invited me to go and do a talk in Hong Kong, which was great. So I was like, okay, yeah, where do I sign?
Yeah.
So I went over, they flew me over, put me up in a lovely hotel, and I went the day before to look around where I'd be speaking, and they called it a seminar. So they took me into the biggest lecture theatre I'd ever seen, and I've seen a few.
Yeah.
800-seater. They said, don't worry, if there's too many people, we've got an overflow room. And I was like, but this is a seminar, right? So I was slightly jet lagged and thought there might be some lost in. But no, it was 800 people turned up to this event at which I was speaking. So it wasn't like, Pete Quinn has landed.
No, yeah.
Prepare
But
yourself.
Still, that was intense, though.
I did a talk with them. So a very visual talk because of the language barrier. And then I've been, since... when I moved to York, I also welcomed a group and went over there and did another piece of work around inclusion, disseminating good practice from the UK.
Yeah.
I remember sitting at the bottom of the World Trade Center there, which you'll have seen in Batman.
Yeah.
He goes over to Hong Kong, he steals that Hong Kong guy back with the balloon.
Yeah.
So I was in the basement of there writing up a university policy around kind of not cost of living crisis, but kind of people from disadvantaged backgrounds, which was the irony did not escape me.
Yeah.
But that, so it was a wonderful, exciting time, and lots of students from Hong Kong come to York, so that was nice. And from the more broader Chinese mainland. So yeah, that was my kind of how I linked up with Hong Kong. But now I am a guest lecturer at the Education University of Hong Kong, as in my role as Pete Quinn consulting.
But that's where it all started. This is
so I had a link with them before that.
Are you happy to tell us a bit about Pete Quinn Consulting?
Yeah,
and how that came about.
So I enjoyed my time at the University of York. There were some challenges there, and it got to 2016. So I've been there for 3 years. My wife was about to do a master's degree. She had a little bit of ill health at the time as well, but so I had a master's degree, and I had the opportunity to go freelance. It wasn't one that I would have chosen necessarily. I'd always been in a working environment where I got a pension, I got a monthly salary, I got the freedom to do what I wanted to do in the role.
Yeah.
But I'd never gone and done anything that was just for me, and didn't have that kind of fallback position. But circumstances combined, and I became Pete Quinn Consulting. I'm now Pete Quinn Consulting Limited, which is a slightly different animal.
Yeah.
So I went freelance, and I still work with the uni on Uni of York, and I also did some work with St. John. And then all the people that I'd had worked with in the past, or I suddenly, they realised I was freelance. Some people had asked me to do projects already, which you do as a kind of professional courtesy for people. They decided to pay for them instead, which was wonderful and nice. But I think I said to you just before, what I was a house husband and consultant.
Yeah.
And that was a bit funny, and obviously with that backstory of losing a child, the opportunity to spend time with my kids, walk them to school every day, until such point as they didn't want me anywhere near them on the walk to school every day, which was hard. Not really, to and be there when they got home or go and meet them.
Yeah.
But that's where I met Joe from Social Vision. He was a dad who dropped his daughter off as well, and
you met him on the school
we
run?
met in the playground.
That's cool.
I've got a lot of people who I met in the playground who either working professionally, otherwise. I sort of bumped into him, and we've done some work together now, including the impact report
for us. Yeah.
So I was I'd always done my bit as a dad, but it was the weekend challenge that we all have. But now I was dad, and it didn't mean that my wife was any less of a mother. No, just for the benefit of the tape there too. She did a fantastic job, as lots of mums do. and I'd learned a lot from her in terms of that absence of a father figure parenting wise. So that made a lot of difference. So
it gave you a chance to try and go solo.
Yeah.
It gave her a chance to study, and you
Yeah.
got to spend a bit more time with the family and stuff.
Yeah.
So it sounded like it was the right time.
Well, she did a master's alongside a full-time job.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I was doing all the stuff at home, making sure there was food ready for when people got in from work or from study or that sort of thing. Which, as a man, it's like, yeah, man, I cook all the dinners.
Yeah.
And it's like, and all the women turn around, all the kind of main carer people go, so what?
Yeah, what do you want, a trophy?
Yeah, do you want a medal? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
do you know what
high
I had to
five,
do
at
today?
least.
And it's like, yeah, well, I did all that and held a full-time job.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I get it. So that kind of bit, I work on it a bit around privilege and
of course,
and what the opportunities I have as a man versus other people in society, including women and people from other backgrounds and communities, is not lost on me.
No, I think that's massively important to say. We realise that too, that the fact that we can have time and the stability of a well-paid job, that we can run Menfulness, and we have got, I've got a space to have a podcast with you
in the leafy suburbs of York.
Exactly, I know, and that is not lost on us either. But that's why I suppose it's really important that we do our bit, isn't it?
Definitely.
So you were managing. You grew the consultancy then, from a sort of part-time perspective. You had projects, individual projects on, did you?
Yeah, and then I got in touch with Hong Kong, who I was. We'd always try and work together, but because I worked in a university environment where most of the year you're working, and during term times, I couldn't get away. And they said, I said, I've got more time if you want to do anything further. And they said, oh yeah, could you teach a course on inclusive practice in education for us? We've got a Chinese version, we want an English version. And I said, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what does that mean? And I brought together a little team, and we have run that course 6 or 7 times now.
Right.
Which is quite cool. People from Singapore got in touch with an organisation I used to work with and said, we want someone to come and look at the politics in universities in Singapore. Do you know of anyone? And they went, well, we know this guy called Pete who used to be part of us and he's now freelance. Why don't Student Minds, I do work for. I knew Student Minds. They're an organisation, not Young Minds, but similar. They grew up in Oxford, and I knew them from a charity I was involved in there called Keen, which was about disabled kids participating in sport. And so I do some training for them. I got in touch with them and said, I would like to make a donation of my time to you, please. When I set up Pete Quinn Consulting, I wanted to give something back.
Right, I see.
It sounds very, I wanted to give something back to my community. But what I meant was I'd like to give something back to the community. So when I went to start to do training for Student Minds, I didn't charge them the rate that I would normally charge to deliver training for other people. So I did my work. I did work for an organisation called Goss Consultancy, who I do a lot of work for in terms of digital inclusion, as well as cultural inclusion. So I was really lucky that I had sufficient network and that I'd worked at Oxford University.
Yes.
Which doesn't always help, but doesn't always hurt either.
Yeah.
It's a very Marmite institution.
Reputable.
Yeah. So it kind of gets you to places where sometimes you've no business being, because people make up all sorts of fantasies like, oh well, he must be a professor or something. So I never correct them when they say professor, but I do point out that I went to Oxford Brookes, and I didn't go to Eton.
No.
I grew up in Birstall, not Borstal, but I did grow up in quite a working class area of Birstall, and there was lots of poverty and lots of difficulty and lots of challenge, and I suppose that has informed my work.
Yeah, well, it doesn't sound like you had a standard upbringing or an education, and you've been through your own struggles, but you've still managed to create a really impressive business doing what you love and believe in.
Yeah, I am fortunate. It's not always been easy. I mean, during the pandemic time, suddenly, like most people who work for themselves, suddenly they had no income. So it's terrifyingly exciting anyway when you don't have that kind of standard pipeline of stuff. But what I did was I'd just come back from Hong Kong and spent quite a bit more time in my hotel room than anticipated because there was a political uprising, which meant you didn't go out much.
Oh, God.
So I was able to say, well, I work for myself, so I have to have some discipline around that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, here's what you do if you're locked in a small space and you can't get out very much. And not because of COVID, but because of tear gas and political disruption.
Man.
So I turned that into a series of webinars, which I started to do. And then everyone realized that actually you can do some. So I've done some projects entirely remotely.
Right.
As most people, I suppose, have. But I've done projects with Middlesex Uni, never stepped foot on campus.
Right.
Worked with a big multinational organisation looking at neurodiversity inclusion. I was meant to be going to Berlin, Baltimore, Barcelona, London, and NYC to do work in all of those locations.
Wow.
Unfortunately,
So you're not
COVID had other ideas.
All remotely.
All remotely. So we did. We just had to pivot and do some kind of questionnaires, focus groups, things like that. But that methodology and that work has led to lots of other projects with lots of other organisations. So
it does sound very broad. I mean, again, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I've written down here. You're an inclusion consultant. You would call yourselves.
That's the easiest way to.
But it does sound like there's like you said. You mentioned digital inclusion.
Yeah.
You mentioned there just seems to be no end to it really when you look at it.
No, thankfully, but sadly for me, there is lots of work.
Yeah.
I mean, at Oxford, I always wanted to be put out of a job. Let's create an environment that's so inclusive that you don't even need
me.
us.
Yeah.
That's lovely and naive. But and I think Oxford's made a huge amount of progress. And continues to do so. It's great teams there doing stuff. But as we've moved into the digital space, more barriers come along. Physical space, more barriers come along. Attitudinal, barriers. And that's why I'm kind of aware of the stigma around mental health generally, but men's mental health in particular. There is that taboo and that stigma.
Yeah. Well, we're working on it together.
Yes.
So what now for Pete Quinn then? Are you how are you managing the stress of working for yourself? Are you still loving it? Is it?
It's good. It's good. I've got lots of work. I'm really fortunate. And I've got lots of opportunities and lots of prospects. I'm actually doing a project with Oxford University around research culture there and neurodiversity in particular. I've just finished doing a project similar like that with Bristol Uni. But I work more broadly as well with corporates. So I loved working in that university space, but I now work for clients as diverse as the Tower of London. I've worked with them, the shoe company.
And how does it work when you these places come to you and say we're looking to be more inclusive? Or we're looking to, do they bring you in and you tell them how not inclusive they are?
Well, I do a lot of co-produced work. So I was always collaborative in Oxford. We always involved people, like I was touching on earlier, who had that lived experience. So at the Tower of London, and this is for Goss Consultancy, we did a mystery visit with lots of people who were autistic.
Right.
And they spot loads of quirks and difficulties that they find particularly problematic, but also it means that most people benefit. They identified the quiet, serene spaces within the tower and the pinch points and those sorts of things. And that's what Goss does, and that's why I went to work for them, is because they do collaborative, co-produced work.
That's awesome.
Do a lot of stuff around apps and accessibility around that for people with lived experience. So it's that co-produced collaborative approach that really benefits. So I'm the sort of face of it, but I've got a team of people alongside me. I was going to say behind me, but they're all around me. Because I'm sort of in the middle of it. So I coordinate and they do the work, and it's very impactful. We've just done a piece of work. I was on the touchline watching my son play football yesterday with someone who works at the Opera House, who I know have enabled donations to Menfulness through people like Jimmy Carr and
they've been brilliant.
They're really so big shout out to them. But I've done a project on the ticketing system that people buy tickets for them and loads of other venues, where if you come from a particular community or background or characteristic, you'd really struggle to understand how you book and how you do it digitally, and did it work on the phone as well as it did on a laptop? And then there's an assumption that you've got these digital devices and you can do it within the time limits that they sometimes impose, for example. So they're making really good progress, organisations like that. on wanting to do it differently. Unfortunately, for some organisations, we don't just do a token. Yeah, you're great. And do you really? It's like, this isn't great.
Yeah, don't bring us in if you just want a thumbs up.
So what we call it is being a critical friend.
Yeah.
And we highlight the good practice, as most people are trying.
Yeah. Well, the very fact they're prepared to.
It's very rare that no one's not trying.
Yeah.
But which probably doesn't make sense when no one's not trying. I think that's great grammar. But they usually want to make a difference and want to make progress, and it's usually incremental. There's no kind of silver bullets or big bangs.
But it's probably quite, what's the word? It's probably quite difficult for organisations to open their doors and go, right, bring someone like you in, because not only does that mean change, which usually means cost, but also people are worried about failing with this stuff, aren't they? There's a lot of reputational damage for finding out that you're not inclusive.
But in a way, it's de-stressing, because most people actually are doing all right.
Yeah,
they're not doing terribly. They're doing all right.
Yeah,
but they're not doing brilliantly, and they could do so much better, and it could increase participation from all sorts of communities. It increases revenue.
Yeah,
and you're more happy in your role, knowing that actually you're doing work that makes a difference and changes things. So web developers aren't always happy when you point out some things, but actually they are really happy, because web developers tend to want it to work right and properly.
Yeah.
Retailers are happy because it sells more. Cultural heritage arts places are more happy because the guest or the visitor is actually experiencing it in a positive way, rather than leaving in frustration because this doesn't work, that doesn't work, that's not working out for them. Or if they do need a bit of time out on their visit, it's clear where to go, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Great. So I was going to talk to you a little bit. We mentioned running for Joe, because you do that every year. You do a run for Joe Cox,
so
don't you?
There is a race in Birstall, my hometown, called the Run for Joe, and that's part of the Joe Cox legacy.
Yeah.
And that kind of more in common message. And so my dad was in a care home in Birstall for many years, and unfortunately it was right next to where Joe Cox died, and it had quite a big impact on the care home, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to give something back in that community bit when they announced that race, and they were looking for sponsors. So I said, I'd love to sponsor it. So I am one of several sponsors. Let me be clear, because I sponsor the whole race. So there's a number of sponsors, so a lot of local organisations, and year on year I've had the opportunity, and from being successful and having enough money to be able to kind of redistribute and give back. Run for Joe.
And that could be done remotely, can't it?
That was done remotely. Yeah. So Menfulness got involved with that, because we didn't all have to go over to Birstall to do it. There was a really good little band of Menfulness men running around the Knavesmire on the appointed day at the appointed time during COVID times. It was in person this year, and I was reminded of how hilly.
Yeah,
It's only 6K, but there is, at that race, I bumped into a guy who I had met at Parkrun, and he saw the Joe Cox T-shirt, and it was either a Joe Cox one or a Menfulness one, and I was telling him about Menfulness, and now he's got an idea about creating a kind of Menfulness more in common mashup.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And he's done quite a lot of thinking about it, so I will have to talk to you about that. But the whole point of that Run for Joe that I loved was it was just about everyone coming together.
Yeah.
And there was loads from the Pakistani community all around Batley and Dewsbury, lots of people from all sorts of backgrounds. There was the Cubs, the Scouts, people from the mosque, the churches. There were all the mascots from all the rugby league and football teams, and they do a little race. That's so cool. It's about community. So we do have far more in common than divides us, no matter what you read on social media or in certain newspapers.
Yeah, and I love that running does that. I felt that at the 10K in York, actually. They call it the Run for All, and it did feel like even if you were able to run, it was quite a family-orientated day. There was the sideline people on the side. It was the first ever organised run that I'd done.
Wow. It was a very supportive one, but where the Menfulness stand was, which loads of people came and got badges and merch, we were there after the race, and there were people of all sorts of different abilities just hanging out and just sort of debriefing and whatnot. And there were people still trickling past.
Yeah.
And no one was like, "Oh God, look at we're now well over the time." We were there cheering and shouting them, and it was such a kind of it was very. That's the kind of values and event that I want to be part of.
Of course, yeah. Me too. So running, I'm pretty sure it was you that at the when we used to do the social circuits. Did you turned up having run there once? Is
No,
that right?
that was so the first ever social circuits. I parked round the corner, and I was running late, so I ran over the brow of the hill,
run there.
and loads of people assumed that I'd run there.
I love it.
I was really tempted to. I think it was Joe, because I used to see Joe at the school gate in my running gear, because I used to drop my kids off at school, go for a run around the city walls, and then get on with work. And that's
nice.
what I love. That's kind of part of the medicine part. Running is medicine. It sort of sets my day up. I turned up and Joe went, "Have you run here, Pete?" And I was just like in that dilemma. I do.
Let him believe.
No, I'd love to tell you I did.
Too honest.
Yeah, but I do love running.
Yeah.
And I don't get to do it as much as I like. But wherever I go in the world, so Hong Kong, I've run in Hong Kong. When I was doing the Joe Cox run before pandemic, I couldn't do the run in Birstall, so I did it in Hong Kong in Victoria Park. I might not have made 6K because it was 35 degrees at 10 o'clock at night. I think I did make 6K though, but it was not a great time. It was on Strava. Strava's fine in Hong Kong. It's along the river in York. It's not, is it? I wasn't in Haxby running. I was down by the Ouse. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Do you do a bit of roller skating as well?
I may have done. So people who are very cool will remember that Batley Rollerdrome from the late 80s. I used to go there. So I used to love roller skating. I skated a lot when I was a kid. And then at uni, I skated around Oxford a lot. I'm 6'2", and on roller skates I'm slightly higher than that. And Oxford is not the most skate friendly place, particularly with all those tourists. But I liked it. And then for a while I didn't skate, and then for a significant birthday, my kids
got yourself a pair.
I did. I spec'd them to Bauer Turbos, which were like the best skates. So yeah, I skate.
Nice.
I don't do it as much as I like, and actually I am conceding to age. I've been wearing elbow and knee pads while I've been out. But I love it.
Yeah,
I love it, and I've still got it, Sam.
Have you?
I've still got it.
Of course you have.
I was flying around Roundtree Park the other week, backwards, forwards, round and round, deliberately, not by accident. And
excellent.
It's funny when the youth see me from there. I wear particular sort of t-shirts and stuff from back in the day, and I don't think they realise they're sort of like, "Ooh, what's it?" And then I'm on my skates, so. Yeah, they
I love it, Pete.
They do not understand, Sam.
I love it.
Yeah.
Excellent, mate. Excellent. So, also, as part of these conversations, we're asking people to share with us some content that's affected them or helped them or changed them, whether that be music, songs, podcasts, stuff like that. So, I did ask you for a few. I don't know if you can remember any of them, so I can read them out for you if you'd like.
There's one book which was out of them all. So there's a great book by Peterson. Have you got that one written down?
Yes, I do, yeah.
What's the title of that one? Because I call it the Spotty book.
Pursuing Good Life.
Yeah, Pursuing the Good Life.
100 Reflections in Positive Psychology.
So there's a guy called Peterson who is a kind of researcher in positive psychology and sadly died. Everyone knows about a guy called Martin Seligman who did the thing around happiness. It's loads of little extracts that he wrote for Psychology magazine, and it's all about the evidence around positive psychology, which is the science of happiness. Being British, we don't talk about happiness. It's a taboo subject. It's probably worse than mental health, isn't it?
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah, we don't talk about it. But so positive psychology is what works in terms of, there was huge amounts of effort into what causes depression, what causes anxiety, what causes all these aspects of mental health.
And that's
positive
dealing with the negative sort of thing.
Focuses on. So now we know about that. How can we increase happiness? And it's not about denying the reality.
No.
But there's a huge evidence base about gratitude journals. There's a huge evidence base about green space. There's a huge evidence base about doing kind things for others.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah.
You're kind to others.
Yeah. It makes you feel better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's
so,
awesome.
So that of the things I mentioned, that is the book, I would say.
Brilliant. I will definitely be getting a copy of that, mate. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the High Performance podcast.
Yeah, I enjoy that. Not all of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them. Really loved Kevin Sinfield's, for example.
Also, it's each for a different person.
People, yeah, and it sounds, a lot of teachers listen to it by the sounds of it, actually, because it's about kind of hints and tips from successful people. But you don't sit there and think, oh, well, good for you and all your success. But they managed to get some really good guests. Kevin Sinfield, I've mentioned. Gareth Southgate around when England were doing really well in the Euros is brilliant. Yeah. But I would also listen to Tyrone Mings, who plays for Aston Villa, but also for England. His stuff around racism and Black Lives Matter was really kind of profoundly insightful. John McAvoy, I think, has done that. If not, John McAvoy is really worth listening to on anything he does. He's the armed robber who is now a triathlete, sponsored by Nike. So he's just got an amazing story. Really, really impressive. But I do listen to quite a lot of different podcasts and really enjoy it.
Yeah, well, you've listened to the ones we've had on here. Like just getting people in here and listening to their story. Like it's been really, really good to hear a bit more about you today, mate. I'll just go back through. So we've got guided meditations from Tara Brach as well.
Yeah, so a lot of
you into meditation? Are you?
I am. My wife's much better at it than me. I'm quite good at it. I'm quite good at mindfulness. I did mindfulness workshops at Oxford University because that's where the mindfulness centre is. And but yeah, a lot of men struggle, in my experience, with meditation.
I struggle with it.
I mentioned Tara Brach because she was recommended to me by a male friend, and all the male friends or acquaintances or members of Menfulness who I've recommended Tara Brach to really enjoy her.
Right, that's good.
So she does guided meditation, but she also talks about forgiving yourself. There's all sorts of stuff about that she's good in, but her voice is great.
Is she on YouTube? Is she?
Yeah, I think she's freely available from all the usual sources.
I will definitely check that out.
Yeah, I really like her. Thich Nhat Hanh as well, as I might have mentioned.
Yes, be free where you are.
He's a Vietnamese monk who died this year, but he's a really amazing guy. He took mindfulness and meditation into some of the penitentiaries that you read about in America.
Yeah.
And it was all about kind of forgiveness of yourself and working well with others. But there's a really good bit in Be Free Where You Are about being in control of your emotions and not getting too anxious, which I've used personally, but also in some of the work I did around, performing well during the day, self-management.
Is it like breath work or meditation stuff? Is it a little
bit? But it's not just about practicing breathing.
Yeah.
A bit of meditation, and it basically says don't wait for the emotion to happen.
Yeah.
Practice it.
Yeah.
And don't focus. It's like when the storm comes. He uses an analogy. Don't be in your head.
Yeah.
That's no good. You want to be in the core and focus on your breathing.
Yeah.
It's great. I can't pretend to even get close to the clarity that he brings.
Yeah. But that's awesome because that sort of teaching, I think, is especially for people who do struggle with anxiety and overwhelm and burnout. Modern sort of day coping problems. There, I guess that would be really useful for them. So I've got lots of stuff that I'm going to check out after this, mate, for sure.
Just one more thing, though. I'd say gratitude journaling. So 3 things on a morning that you're grateful for, and then a tune or something that you can go on Amazon and buy it for £10. The kind of neatly bound gratitude journal.
Yeah.
Or you could just look up gratitude journal template. But if you do that over a period of time, it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, me and Anna, for a while, we were doing best thing, worst thing. Something that her grandma had started with her when she was little. What's the best thing that happened today? What's the worst thing that happened today? Yeah. And we talked about one thing that we were really wanting to make sure we got done the next day. And we need to get back into that because it kind of also gives you an opportunity to kind of draw a line under it. If there's something great that happened, then you want to relish in it a bit. If something not so great happened, you want to draw a line under it. The
gratitude journal as well, as you build that legacy of gratitude and what you're grateful for and happy about. It doesn't mean that you suddenly ascend to
Yeah.
to contemplate the lotus leaf at the temple on the top of the mountain. But you've got a few days behind you. Actually, it's okay.
Things are good.
Things are all right.
Yeah.
All will be well.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And as well, so we're getting some songs together. We're going to have a little Spotify playlist. So you've sent us a couple of songs here.
They're probably quite niche. I can't remember, but
That's good though.
it'll be in
The
whatever
nicher the better.
Whatever I've enjoyed that day.
Yeah, you've got for your happy song, you've got Pet Shop Boys, The Way It Used to Be.
Yeah.
JCRZ remix.
Got to be that remix. All the others are rubbish. Not really. It's just JCRZ does really good remixes of the Pet Shop Boys. I'm a pet head.
Yeah.
I've always loved and listened to the Pet Shop Boys and New Order as well. But that's a brilliant tune. Always uplifts me.
Good, man. In fact, you've got a very eclectic taste. I've had rap from you. I've had dance music. I've had all sorts.
Yeah, music is really powerful.
Yeah.
We were chatting before about whatever you put in you has an effect.
Yeah.
But a lot of the music that I reference is uplifting.
Yeah.
Some of the rap stuff is maybe not so much, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
Those bars of fire, man.
Yeah, that Coast Contra stuff. Some of it's very uplifting.
But that's because it references back to some really powerful hip hop back in the 90s or wherever. And it's just great.
Yeah.
And it's political and it's powerful and it's energizing and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's Coast Contra freestyle for anyone who's a hip hop fan out there.
Yeah.
And then for your sad song, this one I wasn't familiar with this one, so this is Tadok the Priest.
Oh, Zadok the Priest.
Zadok the Priest.
We played it at my dad's funeral. You'll probably recognise it. It's a very classical piece of music.
Right.
But that he used to play that in the summer holidays.
Yeah.
But it's a massive organ choir thing, and I think it's actually a coronation song.
Yeah. Right.
Or I don't know, but it's
It's choir of Westminster Abbey on here.
It's again slightly niche, not for some people, but
it'll be on our playlist, my friend, for
Okay.
sure. Lovely. Well, I think unless you think there's anything else,
I'm good.
Then, but I'd love to have you back to talk maybe more specifically about demystifying well-being, inclusion, diversity, all that. Like, I want to get more of your experience if we can.
Love to do that, Sam. Thank you for all you do for Menfulness, and it's just great. It's a privilege to be part of it. I get just as much good from being part of it, and it's not a selfish thing, but it's just great to be part of something that I think is really powerful, could work in most places in the country, and actually, when we talk about the numbers of people who benefit from it, it's having a real and profound impact on men of York and beyond.
Oh, what's coming from you, mate? That's high praise indeed. We're very, very lucky to have you on board. Long may this relationship continue, and it's been so good to learn a bit more about you and what makes you Pete Quinn. So thank you for being you, my brother.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Yep, you will.
Cheers, man.